which is Learning the Codes of Civility in the Classroom with Linda Copeland. Once a first-generation college student, Linda Copeland has taught composition for more than 30 years since earning her MA degree in English from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Inspired by her father, a gifted toolmaker who struggled with writing, she has focused her career on helping students whose own struggles with writing may keep them from achieving their academic and career goals. At St. Louis Community College, Meramec, she teaches primarily developmental writing courses and serves as the assistant chair of English. Her work has earned her recognition as a master teacher from NISOD and the Emerson Excellence in Teaching Award. In addition to teaching, she has written a number of workbooks on writing and reading fluency. In this session, Linda will offer suggestions for course policies, classroom activities, and writing assignments that introduce students to college expectations and appropriate codes of behavior. Linda, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate this opportunity to share some successful classroom practices that we've had a lot of luck with here at Meramec, and our students seem to appreciate as much as we do. I think every time we step into a new classroom, every teacher brings that hope that students are going to be as excited to be there as the instructor is, and that students are going to be engaged with learning during the time in the classroom. But unfortunately, most of us find out very soon that that enthusiasm and engagement with learning that we hope will be there isn't always there to the degree we'd like it. And so we're frustrated sometimes by the kinds of behaviors that we see, and I'm sure those of you who have taught for any length of time recognize some of these sort of troublesome behaviors that can take can really turn the classroom into the kind of experience we don't want it to be. Just sort of rude, uncivil behavior. And a lot has been written.
Linda?
Yeah?
I'm sorry, would you be able to show your screen? I don't believe you are.
I have my screen is up on my screen.
Did you see a prompt where it told you you were presenter?
Let me see. I'm unmuted.
Let me try it again. Give me 1 second.
Okay, I see something that says Jessica Nielsen is the presenter.
Now it should say that you were the presenter, I believe.
All right. Show my screen.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we often wonder what causes some of the poor behaviors that we see from our students, everything from talking out of turn to even more serious problems like making racist, sexist, or homophobic remarks. And we wonder what causes these kinds of problems in our classroom. But we know the results. Learning is disrupted. Faculty productivity suffers. It's just very emotional, and it damages our confidence and self-esteem when we have these kinds of problems in the classroom. And students often get very negative views, not only of their professor, but of the institution as a whole. And a lot of research has been done to try to determine what causes so many of the uncivil behaviors, everything from a consumer mentality that some students bring to the classroom. Many of our students are under an incredible amount of stress, from how they're going to pay for the school to personal problems that they have to face. And then, of course, there's just sort of this idea, I'm the only person in the world, and everything should be what I want, and the whole classroom should revolve around me. And then sometimes there's just not enough orientation into what it means to be a college student. And I noticed that a lot of colleges do have new student orientations. My own campus has very extensive student orientations, but sometimes I don't think these address some of the problems that we face in the classroom. They deal with some of the larger issues that students have to deal with. And so for me, I guess what really made me understand what the problem could be for many of my students was when I came across an article by Jonathan Hall from Rutgers University. And the article was about plagiarism, and I have the link here for those of you who'd like to access that. But the specific part of that article that really touched me was he made an analogy of our students, especially our first generation students, our first semester students, that when he compared to successful writing as similar to walking into a cocktail party and not knowing how to join in that conversation, to hear everyone speaking a language that one just didn't understand. And that really resonated with me. I could remember my own first days in the classroom as a first-generation college student and hearing terms and dealing with expectations that I had never encountered before and really didn't have anyone to explain to me. And so I took that analogy to heart, and I wanted to find ways to help my students become a part of the college academic community and help them understand those features of that community that they may not have brought with them. They probably didn't bring with them. And I thought, since we know that writing is probably one of the best ways to learn, why not use writing to help teach students the kind of civility they were going to need in the classroom? So I devised, with some help from colleagues, some writing activities that we could use very early in the semester that would not only help students become good members of our classroom community, but that would help them in the larger college community, help them in their other classes. And so we used writing as a way to help our students learn two basic codes: a code of behavior and a code of communication. Now, regarding first the code of behavior, in talking with students about this code of behavior, I would begin by discussing other codes in sort of a historic context. Knights having a code of chivalry, the samurai warrior, his code to the shogun, and even the cowboy's code of the West. And then I would talk about other codes they might be more familiar with, codes they were expected to follow in their own workplace, or, codes that they might have to follow on a Sunday when they were in, or a Saturday, whatever place of worship they belonged to. And just talking about codes as a way of living in the world and a way of presenting oneself and treating others. And most students understand that there are a set of expectations. We would then go to the particular kinds of kind of broad expectations that are expected of them on their college campuses. And these are many of the expectations that I think are addressed in college orientation classes, that they're expected to be active learners and critical thinkers, to be responsible, a great deal more responsibility than many of them had in high school. That's their responsibility to take advantage of resources, writing centers and other resources on campus, time management, and to look for ways they can participate in their campus community. And again, most students have heard these in the college orientation classes, but it gives them a chance to sort of talk about them in a smaller circle in the classroom. But what I also introduced that I don't know is really brought up in the college orientation classes is this idea of ethos. And quite honestly, my developmental students, when I reference Aristotle and talk about this great Greek philosopher, most of them think it's kind of cool. It's sort of what they expected college to be, talking about ideas that they maybe hadn't heard before. And so I introduced this idea of ethos and explained to them that Aristotle thought that anyone who was trying to make a case had to try to come across as a good person, because typically we will believe and respect people more likely if we think them to be credible, respectful people themselves. And so the importance of showing good character and how important that is in the classroom in particular, to come across as a good person. And so we've come up with some writing activities that many of us have been using in our developmental writing classes. And I've had a lot of feedback, particularly from some of our adjunct instructors, that starting the classroom with a discussion of character and the importance of good character and using some of these writing activities has set a very positive tone in their classroom. And nearly all of them have said that there have not been the kind of disruptive behaviors that they experienced in the past since doing these kinds of writing activities. And these are not activities that need to take away from the regular types of instruction we have built in. But most of us in those early weeks, we do sort of sample writing activities and introductory writing activities, and these can be incorporated in that way. So they're kind of performing double duty. You're getting good writing samples, you're getting your students writing, but you're also heightening their awareness for the kinds of behavior you want them to bring to your classroom. One very basic kind of activity that you can do, and that also helps build good classroom community, is to use a writing activity to establish or reinforce some of your own classroom policies. And so one type of activity that we've used is to give students sort of a partial list of some pretty basic classroom expectations or rules, coming to class on time, bringing what they need to take notes, bringing their text, being willing to share their own ideas and opinions, and to show respect for other opinions that might be different from theirs. Even some basics like if you have a problem or a question with a grade, not to try to address it during class time, but to come after class. So we sort of set the stage with a few of these, and then put students in groups and ask them to brainstorm what they think are some other good guidelines that are it's going to make the classroom a comfortable place and a very civil place for them to all work together. And usually I tell them, let's try to come up with, maybe a dozen, sort of rules or expectations. And students, I think, appreciate being brought in on that. And sometimes they come up with, some kinds of expectations that I even find new and sort of surprising, and willingly incorporate into the classroom expectation guidelines. Another activity that the students find very eye-opening, and I found this a long time ago, I can't even remember where, but to give them a list of 3 columns, and in one column list what are probably unrealistic expectations that they might be bringing. Perhaps these were expectations that they bring with them from their high schools. And I use this list to basically list about anywhere from 5 to 10 issues that I've had to deal with in the past that I found particularly disruptive or particularly uncivil, rude, expectations that just don't create a positive environment. And I think many of us are troubled when students come up and say, are we doing anything important today, especially after having put so much work into classroom preparation. But students don't often think about, I really don't think they think they're being rude. I don't think they set out to be rude. But calling it to their attention and asking them to think about why that's not a very realistic expectation, that your instructor is going to appreciate that question, really kind of causes them to pause and then to maybe come up with a better way of asking the question. Having them think that think about how effort is not really what their grade is based on. Thinking that the instructor is going to be prepared if they come up at the beginning of class and say, I wasn't here, and that instructor is automatically going to have all the handouts and everything for them. Having them think about that and what might be a better approach. And many come to college knowing that they're in charge of their learning and that there's not going to be the kind of attendance policies they have in high school, but some of them are very unrealistic in thinking that instructors don't care if they miss class. And so they need to understand why that's unrealistic and why there might be a more realistic approach to that. And having them fill out, the 3 columns in groups, it's a very eye-opening experience for them and for the instructor, because you sort of find out too that, again, if they were not behaving in a way that you thought was appropriate, it wasn't a deliberate attempt to be rude on their part. A lot of times it was simply because they didn't know. An activity that I started recently after a colleague in our psychology department was doing some work with, again, increasing civility in the classroom. Did some research and with faculty and students trying to identify inappropriate behaviors that really bugged the faculty and behaviors that the students even found distracting. And so I talked to my students and asked them what they thought faculty would find annoying, and asked them to brainstorm a list of 5 behaviors, and then I asked them to come up with their own list of behaviors that they found distracting or annoying or rude in the classroom. And then I shared with them the research that our psychology teacher, her research, what she came up with. And we had a really interesting discussion about this. And this, again, was particular for my own campus based on the psychology teacher's research. But faculty found texting very annoying, surfing, with iPhones or whatever during class, and, of course, side conversations. The one that my students were most surprised by was, why would faculty be annoyed by loud yawning in class? And I asked them to think for a minute how they would feel if they had prepared a presentation and I was listening to it and just yawned real loud and stretched during it. And all of a sudden, sort of the light bulbs went off, and they were like, yeah, that might make me feel bad. And I said, well, it does for instructors too. And then I shared with them too, what students found annoying behavior among other students, and some of those were very surprising. I suppose most faculty didn't even recognize sometimes that students were coming to class under the influence, but other students sure knew it. And it was interesting to the students to find out that some of their older colleagues in the class, their older students, found texting particularly distracting and annoying. So again, the whole point of this was just to heighten awareness, and it started some good discussion. And some of these behaviors, in fact, in my class, I have to say that nearly all of the behaviors that we talked about as being rude and disruptive didn't really go on in my classroom during the semesters that we've done this. Another nice activity is I have students read articles about grade conflicts, and a really good one is one by Max Roosevelt in the New York Times, Student Expectations Seen as Causing Grade Disputes. And I have them read that, and then they come to class and I have them free write on one of the issues he raises that instructors should or should not consider a student's effort when determining their grade. And it was very much an eye-opener for me how much students believe effort should be considered. And we have a really good discussion about how I can tell effort, how I'm supposed to assess effort, how I'm supposed to know what their effort is. That as a teacher, unless I'm following them home or wherever they write their papers, I don't know how much time and effort they put into it. And I explained to them what I can see and what I can evaluate, and the importance of that final product, and especially drawing parallels to the workplace and how they're evaluated there. That most likely it's not how hard they try, but it's the results. And again, we start out with very different views on this topic, but after this exercise and after the discussion, I think both sides come away with a much clearer understanding of how grades are going to be determined, and conflicts just do not arise that often. A common complaint by many of the faculty that I've worked with, especially among our adjuncts, is they're so careful to set up policies and explain those policies to students, but the first time an individual student has the policy come into conflict with something that student has done, there's a problem. And so one of the things we've done is early on compose case studies, and we've come up with different scenarios about late work, for example, or about repeated tardies. And we put together a study where an instructor has a clear policy with expectations and consequences, but then here's a student with what the student thinks is a clear reason to make an exception for that policy, and we write it up as a case study, and then we ask the students to write a response to that. And again, it sort of heightens the students' awareness that it's very typical, probably very human, to want exceptions made for individuals, but it reveals to them the complexity of those situations and why, you know, instructors are not likely to make exceptions except in pretty extraordinary cases. So again, it heightens the kind of awareness that is probably going to reduce some classroom conflicts and problems. An exercise that my students have really enjoyed, and again it heightens a lot of their awareness, is we read about Mitchell's marshmallow experiment, and you can access that online. It appeared in the New Yorker, and that's where very young children were put in a room and given a certain time that they had to sit there with a tempting marshmallow and not eat it. And then those students were tracked over time, and the students who were able to delay their gratification tended to be more successful in other areas of their life, including academics. And so I found just a fun video on YouTube with the little kids actually doing an updated version of Mitchell's marshmallow experiment. And we talk about how difficult it is to delay the expectations, that when they come to college, they're just expected over and over again to delay gratification, rather, that they can't always do what they want because their college work has to take precedence. And again, I think it shows them that we understand why they can be frustrated and how hard it is sometimes to do the work we want when they have so many other demands on their time and just activities they'd rather do. But it shows them how being able to delay gratification, developing that self-discipline, is going to help them so much. So the follow-up writing activity I usually give is asking them how they can apply what Mitchell learned to their own experience of dealing with those temptations that may take them away from their college work, and what they can do, you know, to kind of improve their own self-discipline. And then another activity that I do as part of usually around midterm, is I tell them that very often they may have to get character references for jobs or other areas of their life, and I ask them to imagine what kind of character reference they believe that I would write to them at that point in the class, that, you know, based upon their attitude and the way they've behaved and their work ethic and so on, what kind of letter of reference would I write for them? And I ask them to imagine that they needed a letter of reference to take to their next teacher. And again, it's kind of an eye-opener. It just helps them reflect upon not just their academic behaviors, but the behaviors that reflect their ethos. And it's been a very interesting and eye-opening activity. I also like to use writing to help students with another code, and the code we more often deal with in writing classes, but the code for speaking and writing in an academic community. And first and foremost, I talk a lot about audience. I don't know if we do enough of that sometimes in our developmental writing classes, just the importance of audience and how particularly important in college that they want to express their ideas and they want to be confident about expressing those ideas, but that if those ideas are going to be respected and taken seriously, they have to be expressed in a way that is reflective and reasonable and avoid sounding vulgar or biased, and kind of making those expectations a little more clear. Students are so proud, so many of them are so proud about being in college, and they want to be educated. And so to make very clear to them that educated people are clear, precise, and very important, educated people are respectful in their communication. And then to show them ways to come across that way. And so what I do is I try to make very clear that I have expectations for their written as well as their spoken language in class. And I give them a handout with what I call my no tolerance errors. I tell them that these are errors that hurt their credibility. Now, it's a writing class where I know they don't come knowing grammar or punctuation mechanics, but the kinds of errors I put on this list are errors that call for conscientiousness, that call for being careful. And I tell them that that is the first step in establishing credibility, to show that you're a careful and conscientious writer, and that the errors on my no tolerance list are those that they just catch by being careful. So I don't want text messaging abbreviations. I don't want them forgetting to capitalize a sentence, because they all know how to do that. And I don't want those little lowercase i's that they're so used to doing in their text messaging. I also include on that list some forbidden words, words that frustrate so many teachers because they're either vague or over-emphatic. And I tell them to just look for these words, that they show me that they are looking over their writing. If they can catch these words and find more precise or more realistic substitutions. And then I also, I always, collage for college is such a common mistake in so many of their papers. And I tell them, come on, we're so proud we're in college, let's spell it right. So I keep the list fairly limited, but, and it becomes, the things especially becomes probably the hardest word for them to stop using. But usually by the midterm, I don't have to catch them using any of the forbidden words or forbidden expressions. And the vulgar words and expressions, a lot of times we have to catch some of these in their writing early on because they're not always aware that these words are not appropriate and these expressions are not appropriate. So another exercise I do to help them understand what I mean by vulgar expressions and inappropriate language is I give them just a very short editing exercise. And when they look over an exercise like this one, they can usually find, the texting abbreviations, of course, right off. And some of the usage the usage errors, they kind of find those. And, I tell them we're going to have to probably work on some usage because, those can sometimes be ingrained bad habits that we have to work on. But then we look at, some of the expressions like it really sucks, which they might be used to saying, but we talk about why that's not appropriate in college level writing. And so, I try to give them examples, and again, because I think, especially early in the course, where the students are still so enthusiastic about being college students, I think at that time they're particularly receptive to, what do I need to do to sound like a college student, and give them some changes that they can make that at that point really don't involve their understanding a whole lot about writing, about grammar, punctuation, usage, but that just involve, show that you're a conscientious person, that you're paying attention and trying to make these early changes, and that does so much to help your credibility with your teacher. Another sort of awareness heightening that helps them with what I think is very important, email etiquette, is the second week of class, I just come in and write on the board, "It's due today." And the students immediately start looking around and they all start whispering, and then I don't say anything. Eventually somebody will say, "What's due today?" And I'll say, "Okay, nothing really." And I go, "The reason I put that up there is I want you to see how it kind of frustrated you, it confused you, you didn't know what I was talking about." And I said, "You know, I've already gotten emails that have no name, that have no explanation of class, just an email that says, 'What did we do in class?'" And I explained to them that my reaction is also sort of confused and a little panicky, and who is this and what class is this person talking about? And I asked them to consider that I have a lot of classes and a lot of students, different classes, and we're usually all doing very different activities, and vagueness and lack of clarification, it can create panic and confusion just like it did in them. And then I give them an example of an email that I and many of my colleagues have received, where just, "Yo, my friend has an awesome lake house and has invited me up for the weekend. Are we doing anything important in class Friday? If so, please send me any notes and assignments. If you have any questions, I can be reached at." And the students are, at first, they're kind of laughing, and they go, you know, and I ask them to point out probably what isn't a very good idea, what information probably shouldn't be in this email. And it's kind of interesting to me. They immediately point out, well, there shouldn't be those texting abbreviations, but some other areas, so I break the email down for them. A lot of them, again, are kind of surprised, you know, "Yo," that you probably shouldn't address a professor with "yo" or "hey, professor," and a lot of them are a little surprised about that because they don't see anything wrong with it. You know, they think it means they're friendly. So we talk about, you know, the impression that might create and a better alternative. We talk about sharing reasons for missing class that a professor might not be very sympathetic about, and tell them, you know, if you don't have a good reason, probably just say, "I will be unable to attend class." But this sort of insults the professor that you're just doing something, you know, fun and missing class. Just don't put that in there. And we've usually already talked about how asking if we're doing anything important is not a good idea. A lot of them don't think that it's a little cheeky and presumptuous to say, you know, "Stop what you're doing and send me all the handouts and assignments and work that I've missed because I haven't been there." Most of them, we talk about the alternatives, what they need to do instead, going to the professor's office and picking up the material, or in the case of those instructors who use Blackboard, to go to Blackboard and look for postings, not to just expect a professor can drop everything and email all of this work to an individual student. And then the idea, if you have any questions, again, instructors are typically not going to stop what they're doing and call students, but that a better alternative might be, you know, "I will call your office during your office hours to make sure I've got all of this complete." And usually it's a pretty interesting discussion when this is all done, and a lot of clarification's been made on both sides. And again, I've always found it reassuring that when students do this, it's not because they're trying to be rude or disrespectful. It's because they just simply didn't know the appropriate way to address an instructor in an email. So as a follow-up assignment, I asked them to send a short email introduction and include information about themselves, that's going to help me help them succeed. And these are always sort of the neatest email, because they'll always identify themselves, because I always tell them how important that is. So they'll give me their name, they'll tell me which course they're in, they'll begin the email with "Dear Professor Copeland," and then they'll give me some information about themselves that I've always found so helpful in knowing more about them as individuals, information about family situations that may conflict with their work, or information about their goals and what they hope to achieve in college. And all of that is so helpful to me. So it opens up those email lines of communication. It opens them up in a way that's going to be civil and respectful on both parts. And I think it again, starts the semester off on a real strong footing. And so I would encourage everyone to do a few of these activities early in the semester. Not only is it helping us with leading our students to become better writers, which is what we want, but I think it also helps our students know about our expectations in the academic community that they're now in. And those guidelines and suggestions and just basic examples give them so much more understanding and a sense of belonging on the college campus. And so thank you so much, and I hope these suggestions work as well for you as they have for me and my colleagues at Meramec.
Thank you so much, Linda. We do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one is from John, who wants to know, how do you deal with those students that ask for exceptions on grades?
Well, first off, and this comes out as part of our discussion when we establish our classroom rules and so on, is I tell them that any discussion like that has to happen in my office, that we don't discuss grades in front of the class, we don't interrupt class, we don't come up right before or right after, but we come during my office hours, because I think a lot of times if there is sort of a knee-jerk or gut reaction, particularly and I'm assuming this is about lower grades than the student would expect. I don't really think students complain about higher grades than they expect. But usually that sort of diffuses a little bit of that knee-jerk reaction if they're angry or disappointed in a grade. So then when they come to my office, I usually, I give them rubrics so they really know the expectations for the guidelines for what's supposed to happen in the assignment. And I'll sit down and go over it with them. I have a clear late policy about assignments, and I typically don't make exceptions for my late policy. And they know that from the get-go. Major assignments, they can turn those in one class period late, but beyond that, I don't take them, and they know that. There's typically enough points in my course that's not going to cause them to fail, but the first time they do it and they see I'm not going to make an exception, it's pretty clear. Now, if a student has had a medical problem, a car accident, and I know that this is truly the case and not being made up, of course I'll work with that student individually. But just the run-of-the-mill, I didn't get around to it. I don't make exceptions. And like I said, usually when I sit down and go over the rubric with them and explain why they got the grade they do, I usually don't have any problems. And since they have the opportunity to revise that assignment, they usually go away prepared to do that. I hope that helps.
Okay, great. And yeah, no, that was a great answer. And then we have a second question here from June, who says, I teach online. How can I use your techniques to help me keep my students on pace even when we don't see each other?
Well, I do think, well, the email etiquette idea certainly can be applied right to that. But I do think that a lot of these writing activities can be topics for discussion boards. Where you put those out there and let the students do those on the discussion boards and discuss it. And then on the basis of that, coming up with some guidelines, again, very specific to your course and your expectations and what the students themselves, have sort of established as, yeah, this is what's needed to keep sort of a civil discourse. Because I think a lot of times, students feel more comfortable sort of saying rude, inappropriate, giving rude and inappropriate feedback because there's sort of that anonymity or that protection of not facing a person. And I think that has to be addressed very early in an online course, heightening their awareness and saying, that's really not acceptable, that it hurts your credibility. You're not going to be seen as a civil person whose ideas are respected if you discuss ideas in a rude, uncivil way. So use the discussion board to do some of these same kinds of assignments and discussions that we do in class, and then on the basis of that, I would establish a clear policy for civil discourse on discussion boards and in other areas that students interact in an online course.
Great, that's a great suggestion. Well, I mean, if anybody else has any other questions for Linda, please let us know through the questions box, and we'll contact her directly for you with your email address. Otherwise, thank you, Linda, so much for your presentation and for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great, and thank you everybody who attended previous sessions today or even just this one. Thank you so much for making Speaking About English great. Have a nice weekend.